On the day I turned 18, they gave me a cardboard box and a bus ticket. What I found at the end of that ride wasn't just a home. It was a choice that would define the rest of my life. If you've ever felt like you were starting over with nothing, or that the world had already written your story for you, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. The box was standard issue, the same kind they used for moving files from the archives to the shredder. It held 2 pairs of jeans, a few t-shirts that had long lost their shape, a toothbrush, and a worn copy of a book I'd read a dozen times. It was the complete inventory of my life so far. The bus ticket was a one-way fare to a town I'd never heard of called Northwood, 300 miles away. Ms. Albright, my case manager for the last 4 years, handed it to me with the same detached professionalism she used for everything. She was a woman made of straight lines and neutral colors, from her beige pantsuit to her carefully filed, unpolished nails. In her world, emotion was a liability, a messy variable in an equation that needed to be solved and filed away. I was her last unsolved equation before her weekend. "Leo, this is it," she said, her voice flat. We were in her office, a small, airless cube with walls the color of weak tea. The air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. A single, sad-looking succulent sat on her filing cabinet, probably a gift from someone who thought it would brighten the place up. It hadn't worked. "As of 9:03 this morning, you are officially an adult. The state is no longer responsible for you." She said it like she was reading a weather report. Clear skies, chance of personal collapse later in the day. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. 18. The number had loomed over me for years, a finish line and a cliff edge all at once. For 2 years of weekly meetings, 2 years of goal-setting worksheets, 2 years of transitional life skills classes. This was the moment everything was supposed to lead to. Freedom. It felt a lot more like being pushed out of a moving car. Ms. Albright slid another object across her desk. It was a smaller box, this one made of heavy, dark wood, bound with a tarnished brass latch. It looked ancient, out of place in her world of laminated pressboard and brushed steel. "This is also yours," she said. "It was left in your grandmother's effects. We've held it in trust for you until your 18th birthday." My grandmother. The name was a ghost in my mouth. I had a single faded photograph of her, a woman with kind eyes and a tired smile, holding me as a baby. She died when I was 3, and a year after that, my father had vanished, leaving me to be swallowed by the system. I had no memories of her, only the official story. She had been poor, unwell, and unable to provide. She had been, in the language of the system, a dead end. I reached for the box. The wood was cool and smooth under my fingers. It felt heavy, solid, real. "What's in it?" I asked, my voice a rough whisper. "We don't know. The terms of the trust were specific. It was to be given to you, unopened, on your 18th birthday. However," she paused, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on a thick manila envelope next to the box. "This pertains to the contents. It's an inheritance, Leo. A piece of property." My head snapped up. Property? I'd expected maybe a sentimental watch, a few old photos, not land. People like me didn't inherit land. We inherited a cycle. "Your grandmother, Eleanor Vance, owned a 5-acre parcel of land just outside Northwood. It has a structure on it, a Quonset hut, according to the county records." She said Quonset hut with a slight wrinkle of her nose, as if the words themselves were distasteful. "The deed is in here. It's yours, free and clear. The property taxes are even paid up for the next 2 years. I stared at her, my mind struggling to catch up. A Quonset hut. I had a vague image of a half-cylinder of corrugated metal, like an airplane hangar from an old war movie. It sounded bleak. It sounded strange. But it was something. It was a place. But that's not the most important part, she continued, leaning forward slightly. It was the most animated I'd ever seen her. There is a standing offer on the property, a very generous one. She slid a piece of paper out of the envelope. It was a letterhead from a company called Ridgeback Development, LLC. An offer was circled in red ink. $250,000. The number didn't seem real. It was a fortune, a fantasy. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding in my life. I could go anywhere, do anything. I could get an apartment in the city, go to community college, buy a car that wasn't a bus. I could be a normal person. Ridgeback has been trying to acquire that parcel for years, as part of a larger land assembly for a resort development, Ms. Albright explained. Your grandmother consistently refused to sell. Now that it's passed to you, they've renewed their offer. All you have to do is sign this acceptance form. The money would be in an account for you within a week. I've taken the liberty of setting up the paperwork. She looked at me, her expression clear. This was the solution. This was the neat and tidy ending to the file labeled Leo Vance. He takes the money, vanishes into the world, and becomes someone else's problem, or no one's. It was the smart move, the logical move. It was the easy way out. You should take the money, Leo, she said, her voice softening for the first time. It was a calculated softness, a tool she was using to close the deal. A place like that, a metal hut in the middle of nowhere, it's no place for a young person starting out. It's a liability. This, she tapped the offer letter, is a clean slate, a real chance. I looked from the crisp corporate letterhead to the dark, mysterious wooden box. One was a simple, bright future handed to me on a platter. The other was a complete unknown, a past I'd been told was a story of failure and loss. The system had taught me to be practical, to take what was offered because you might not get another chance, to survive. And survival meant taking the money. But something held me back, a flicker of, what, loyalty? To a woman I couldn't remember? Or just stubbornness, a refusal to have my entire life, past and future, neatly packaged and signed away in a sterile office by a woman who saw me as a case file. I want to see it first, I said. The words came out before I'd even fully formed the thought. Ms. Albright's face tightened almost imperceptibly. The mask of detached sympathy slipped, revealing a flicker of impatience. She had a weekend to get to. Leo, that's not practical. The bus ticket is for today. It's a 10-hour ride. What will you do when you get there? There's no infrastructure, no running water, according to the file. It's been vacant for 15 years. I want to see it, I repeated, more firmly this time. I picked up the wooden box. The weight of it was grounding. The offer will still be there in a week, right? She sighed, a small, sharp exhalation of defeat. The offer is indefinite. They want the land badly. Fine. She pushed the manila envelope across the desk. All the documents are in here. The deed, the tax records, the offer from Ridgeback, and the key to the hut. She stood up, a clear signal that the meeting, and my time as a ward of the state, was over. The bus leaves from the downtown terminal in 1 hour. Good luck, Leo. She didn't shake my hand. She just turned to her computer, her shoulders slumping slightly as she opened a new file. I was already in the past. I walked out of her office, carrying the cardboard box of my present and the wooden box of my past, and stepped into the blinding, terrifying light of my future. The bus station was a roaring cavern of noise and hurried goodbyes. I found my gate and sat down on a hard plastic chair, placing the two boxes carefully at my feet. The contrast was almost comical. One was flimsy, disposable, holding the meager scraps of a life lived in temporary spaces. The other was solid, timeless, holding a secret. I ran my thumb over the brass latch, but didn't open it. Not yet. I would open it there, at the place it came from. The 10-hour bus ride was a journey through a landscape that slowly bled all the gray out of itself. We rolled out of the city's concrete maze, past endless suburbs that blurred into one another, and then, finally, into open country. The sky got bigger. The buildings got smaller and farther apart. I watched fields of corn and soy scroll past the dirty window, punctuated by lonely farmhouses and the skeletal remains of old barns. The land was flat for hours, a vast, unwrinkled blanket under a pale sky. Then, slowly, it began to change. Hills appeared on the horizon, low and smudged at first, then growing sharper, darker, covered in a dense fur of trees. The bus began to climb, its engine groaning on the inclines. We were heading into the highlands, a part of the state I only knew from maps. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach with every mile we covered. Ms. Albright's words echoed in my head. No infrastructure, no place for a young person. She was probably right. I had no skills. I didn't know how to fix a leaky faucet, let alone survive in a metal shed in the woods. The $250,000 felt like a warm, safe room I had deliberately walked out of and into a storm. What was I doing? Was this some kind of childish rebellion, a pointless gesture against a system that had already let me go? I was chasing the ghost of a woman who, by all official accounts, had failed me. Maybe the greatest kindness she had ever done me was dying so the state could take over. The thought was ugly, and I pushed it away. The bus wheezed to a stop at a crossroads. A single weathered signpost read, Northwood, 5. The driver looked at me in his rearview mirror. "This is you, kid." I was the only one getting off. I grabbed my boxes and stepped down onto a gravel shoulder. The bus pulled away with a hiss of air brakes, leaving me in a sudden, profound silence. The only sound was the rustle of wind in the tall pines that lined the road. The air was different here. It was clean and sharp, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. It was so quiet I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. I stood there for a long moment, a solitary figure at an empty intersection, feeling impossibly small. 5 miles. I shifted the cardboard box under one arm, gripped the handle of the wooden box, and started walking. The road to Northwood was a 2-lane blacktop that wound its way through the hills. The 5 miles felt like 50. The cardboard box, which had seemed so light, grew heavy and awkward. Its corners dug into my side. The sun beat down, and sweat trickled down my back. A few cars passed, their drivers giving me curious looks, but not slowing down. After about an hour, I came to the town itself. Northwood wasn't so much a town as a suggestion of one. There was a gas station with a small, attached convenience store, a post office, a tavern with a faded beer sign in the window, and a handful of houses. That was it. According to the map Ms. Albright had given me, my property was another mile past the town, down a dirt road called Stillwater Lane. I stopped at the convenience store to buy a bottle of water and a bag of chips. The woman behind the counter, who looked to be in her 60s, with a cloud of white hair and shrewd, bird-like eyes, watched me as I paid. "You're not from around here," she said. It wasn't a question. "No, ma'am," I said. "Passing through?" "Something like that. I'm looking for Stillwater Lane." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Not much down that way anymore. Just the old Vance place." She looked at the boxes I was carrying, then back at my face. A flicker of recognition, or maybe just calculation, crossed her features. "You must be the boy, Eleanor's grandson." I was stunned. How could she possibly know? Yes. "Heard the place was finally coming out of probate. We all wondered what would happen to it." She leaned on the counter. "There's a big company wants to buy up all that land, offering crazy money." She was testing me. The whole town probably knew about the Ridgeback offer. "I know," I said quietly. "I'm just going to look at it first." She gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture that seemed to hold a world of meaning I couldn't yet understand. "Well, Stillwater Lane is half a mile up on your left. It's not marked, but you'll see the tire ruts. Good luck, son. That place has been waiting a long time." The dirt road was more like a trail, 2 deep grooves carved into the earth, overgrown with weeds. The trees crowded in, their branches interlocking overhead, creating a green tunnel. The light grew dim and dappled. After another 20 minutes of walking, the tunnel opened into a clearing, and I saw it. The Quonset hut sat in the middle of a 5-acre field of knee-high grass and wildflowers. It was larger than I'd imagined, a long, curved arch of galvanized steel, dulled by weather to the color of a cloudy sky. One end was a flat wall of metal with a single, heavy-looking door. The other end was buried into the slope of a small hill, so the structure seemed to be growing right out of the land. It didn't look like a building. It looked like a scar or a shell. It was the strangest, loneliest, and most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I dropped my boxes in the grass and just stood there, breathing. The wind whispered through the tall grass, making it sigh and sway. Bees hummed in the clover. I was completely alone, but for the first time in my life, it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like solitude. I walked a slow circle around the hut. The metal was cool to the touch, even in the afternoon sun. On the south-facing side, someone had built a crude wooden frame against the curved wall, like the beginning of an addition that had never been finished. The wood was gray and weathered, the nails rusting in their holes. A project started and then stopped. Finally, I went to the door. I pulled the key from the manila envelope. It was old, made of heavy iron, the kind you see in fairy tales. It fit the lock perfectly. With a groan of protest from the rusty hinges, the heavy door swung inward, opening into darkness. The air that rolled out was stale and cool, thick with the smell of dust, time, and something else. Something faintly herbal, like dried lavender. I hesitated on the threshold, my heart pounding. This was it. The place my grandmother had lived. The place she had died. I took a deep breath, hoisted my boxes, and stepped inside. The interior of the Quonset hut was one long, cavernous space. The curved, ribbed ceiling was at least 15 feet high at its apex, making the place feel like the inside of a whale. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the open door. The space was surprisingly full. It wasn't cluttered, but arranged. Along one wall were shelves filled with glass jars containing dried herbs, seeds, and what looked like preserved vegetables. A simple iron bed frame with a thin, stained mattress stood in one corner. In the center of the room was a heavy wooden table and 2 chairs. A pot-bellied wood stove stood near the back, its stovepipe rising up to vent through the metal roof. It was Spartan, but it was clearly a home. Someone had lived here. Someone had carved out a life inside this metal shell. I set my boxes down on the table, the sound echoing in the stillness. I ran my hand along the dusty surface. My fingers came away black. 15 years of dust. 15 years of silence. I walked the length of the space, my footsteps loud on the concrete floor. At the far end, the end built into the hillside, was a small, partitioned-off area with a composting toilet and a primitive sink setup. A hand pump connected to a cistern I could see just outside a small, grimy window. No running water, just as Ms. Albright had said. But it was functional. It was deliberate. My eyes kept being drawn back to the wooden box I'd placed on the table. It seemed to hum with a quiet energy, the focal point of the entire room. But I still wasn't ready. I felt like I needed to earn it, to understand the space before I could understand its secrets. My mission became finding the key to the locked footlocker I'd spotted under the bed. It was a big black metal trunk, secured with a heavy-duty padlock. It felt important. I started a methodical search. I checked the jars on the shelves, ran my hands along the ledges, looked inside the cold wood stove. Nothing. I pulled the thin mattress off the bed frame, hoping the key might have fallen underneath. All I found were more dust bunnies and a desiccated spider. My frustration grew. It felt like a test. I sat down at the table, my head in my hands. The scale of what I had done, walking away from that money, suddenly felt immense and foolish. I was in a tin can in the woods, with no food, no water, and no plan, searching for a key that probably didn't even exist. I looked around the hut again, my eyes scanning for anything out of place. My gaze fell on a collection of old coffee cans on a shelf above the sink. They were filled with the sorts of things one finds in a junk drawer: random screws, bent nails, bits of wire, old buttons. It was the last place I would have thought to look. With a sigh, I got up and took down the first can. It was full of rusty nails. I tipped them out onto the table, the metallic clatter shockingly loud in the silence. Nothing. I took down the second can, this one labeled washers. I poured them out. Still nothing. The third can was half full of bolts and mismatched nuts. I was about to give up when my fingers brushed against something that wasn't a piece of hardware. It was small, cold, and oddly shaped. I pulled it out. It was a tiny brass key, green with verdigris. My heart leaped. I scrambled back to the footlocker, knelt on the dusty floor, and inserted the key into the padlock. It turned with a satisfying click. The lock sprang open. I took a deep breath and lifted the heavy lid. The smell that wafted out was of old paper and cedar. The trunk was packed full. On top was a thick, folded quilt, beautifully made in a pattern of stars. I lifted it out. It was heavy and smelled faintly of mothballs. Beneath it, my breath caught in my throat. The trunk was filled with bundles of letters, tied neatly with faded ribbon. And next to them, wrapped in oilcloth, were stacks of cash. $100 bills, $50 bills, 20s. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a lot. Several $1,000s at least. And beneath the money was a thick, legal-looking folder, bound with a rubber band that had gone brittle with age. I reached for the topmost bundle of letters. On the front, in a careful, spidery cursive, was my name. Leo. Not to Leo, just Leo, as if she were speaking directly to me. I untied the ribbon. The first letter was dated shortly after my 3rd birthday, just weeks before she died. My hands trembled as I unfolded the brittle paper. "My dearest Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone and you have come home. I hope you are not angry with me. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. The story they will tell you is that I was not fit to be your mother, that I could not provide for you. Part of that is true. I was poor. This land was all I had. But that is not why I let them take you." I had to stop and take a breath. My vision was blurring. I wiped my eyes with the back of my dusty hand and kept reading. "The truth is, I was protecting you. Your father, my son, was a good man in his heart, but he was weak. He got involved with some very bad people, a loan shark connected to a big city crime syndicate. He borrowed money he couldn't repay. They came after him. When he disappeared, they came after me. They wanted this land. They knew it was located over a significant aquifer, something that would be worth a fortune to the right developer someday. They tried to intimidate me, to scare me off my own property. I did not scare. My mind flashed to the crude wooden frame on the side of the hut. It wasn't an unfinished addition. It was a barricade she had started to build. "But then they threatened you," the letter continued. "They said if I didn't sign over the deed, they would make sure my grandson had an accident. You were so small, Leo, so perfect. I looked at you, and I knew I could not risk your life for a piece of dirt, no matter how much it meant to me. So I made a deal with the devil. I couldn't give them the land. It was all I had to leave you. But I could give them something else. I could give them you." I let out a sound, a strangled sob. This couldn't be real. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I contacted Child Protective Services. I told them I was unstable, that I was a danger to you. I played the part of the crazy old woman in the woods. They took you, and I knew you would be safe. Safe in a system that was cold and impersonal, but a fortress compared to the danger you were in with me. They would move you, give you a new name, and you would disappear from the people who were hunting for you. My only condition was that the state would hold this property in trust, to be given to you, and only you, on your 18th birthday. It was my gambit. My hope was that by then, enough time would have passed, that the wolves would have moved on to other prey. I let the letter fall into my lap. My entire world had just been dismantled and rebuilt in the space of 5 minutes. The story of my life, the story of abandonment, of being unwanted, was a lie. It was a fabrication. It was a shield. My grandmother hadn't thrown me away. She had hidden me. This land, this hut, wasn't a pathetic inheritance from a failed woman. It was a fortress she had defended, a legacy she had bled to protect. I looked around the dusty, silent space. It was no longer a strange, empty shell. It was a sanctuary. It was the scene of a battle I never knew had been fought for me. I picked up the next letter. "The money I have left for you is not much. It is what I saved, a little at a time, from selling herbs and vegetables at the market in town. I want you to use it to fight, because they will come back. The company that wants to buy this land, I'm sure you've heard of them by now. Don't be fooled by their clean suits and fancy letterhead. Look into them. They are the same wolves in new clothing. They have been waiting, patiently, for me to die, and for this land to fall into your hands, thinking a boy raised in the system would be an easy mark, that you would take the money and run. Please, Leo, don't run." Ridgeback Development, the clean, easy $250,000 solution. It wasn't a lucky break. It was the final move in a 15-year-long chess game. They had waited for the scared, lonely kid to turn 18 and cash out his only real inheritance for a fraction of what it was worth to them. Ms. Albright wasn't a conspirator, I realized. She was just a pawn, like me. She saw a troubled kid and a pile of money and did the logical math, never suspecting the dark algebra that lay beneath it. I opened the legal folder. It was full of documents my grandmother had collected. Old newspaper clippings about a crime syndicate being broken up in the city, with several names highlighted. Articles about land speculation and water rights in the region. And her own detailed notes. She had been investigating them, building a case. She had been preparing for a war she now expected me to fight. I cried then. I sat on the dusty floor of a metal hut in the middle of nowhere and cried for the grandmother I had never known, but who had loved me with a ferocity that defied logic and time. I cried for the years I had spent feeling worthless and alone, not knowing I was the subject of a desperate, heroic act of love. And I cried for the boy I had been, the boy who had just been handed a legacy he had no idea how to carry. The weight of it was crushing. Sell and be free, safe and rich. Stay and fight for a piece of land against a faceless, powerful enemy. Her words echoed in my head. Please, Leo, don't run. I sat there for what felt like hours, the sun sinking lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the floor. The air grew cold. I held two different futures in my hands. A piece of paper in a manila envelope worth $250,000 and a stack of letters in a wooden box worth everything. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where you had to choose between the easy, logical path and the harder one that felt true to your soul? Let me know about it in the comments below. I think we all face those crossroads, and it helps to know you're not the only one standing there, trying to decide which way to walk. I read every single one of your stories, and they remind me that we're all just trying to find our way home. When I finally moved, it was with a sense of clarity I had never felt before. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Selling this land would be the real abandonment. It would be like spitting on her grave. It would be letting the wolves win. I pulled out my phone. The signal was weak, one flickering bar, but it was enough. I dialed the number for Ms. Albright's office, knowing she wouldn't be there on a Friday evening, but that I could leave a message. It went to voicemail, her same flat, professional voice. Ms. Albright, it's Leo Vance, I said, my own voice sounding strange and new to my ears. It was steady. I got to the property. I just wanted to let you know. I'm not selling. I'm staying. Please inform Ridgeback Development their offer is rejected. This is my home now. I hung up before I could second-guess myself. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with purpose. My first act as the custodian of this place was to make a fire. I found a stack of dry, seasoned wood next to the stove and a box of matches. The stove drew beautifully, and soon a comforting warmth began to push back the chill. The hut was filled with the flickering orange light and the smell of wood smoke. It felt alive. Using the last of the daylight, I took one of the empty water jugs and walked the half-mile back to the town's gas station. The woman at the counter was still there. She saw me come in with the jug. "There's a public spigot out back," she said, not even waiting for me to ask. "Good well water." "Thank you," I said. As I was leaving, she called out, "Name's Martha, by the way, if you need anything." It was a small thing, but it felt huge, an anchor. I walked back to the hut under a canopy of stars so bright and numerous they looked like spilled salt on black velvet. I had never seen a sky like that. Back inside, I ate the bag of chips I'd bought, drank the clean, cold well water, and read more of my grandmother's letters by the light of the fire. I learned about her life, her love for gardening, the names she'd had for the birds that visited her feeder. I was meeting her, page by page. That night I slept on the thin mattress, wrapped in the star-patterned quilt she had made. I slept more soundly than I had in years. The next morning I woke with the sun. The first order of business was to take inventory of the cash she had left me. I counted it carefully on the big wooden table. It came to just over $7,000. It wasn't life-changing money in the way the $250,000 was, but it was a tool. It was a war chest. I made a list: food, tools, seeds, lumber. My gaze fell on the crude, weathered frame on the south side of the hut. The unfinished project. An idea began to form in my mind, a way to honor her fight and begin my own. She had built a fortress to keep the darkness out. I would add a room of light, a place for things to grow, a sunroom. The trip to the nearest town with a real hardware store and a supermarket was a 30-mile journey. I paid a local kid with a beat-up pickup truck, a friend of Martha's grandson, $50 to drive me. He was a quiet teenager who seemed deeply unimpressed with my plan, but he took the money. I spent nearly $1,000 that day. I bought a heavy-duty hammer, saws, a level, bags of concrete mix, lumber, and thick sheets of polycarbonate for the roof. I bought cans of beans and rice, coffee, and a new thick sleeping bag. But the most important thing I bought was a pack of notebooks and pens. Like my grandmother, I was going to document everything. The work was brutal. I had never built anything in my life. My first attempts were clumsy failures. The concrete I mixed for the small foundation was either too wet or too dry. My cuts on the lumber were crooked. Every muscle in my body ached. There were moments of deep despair, where I'd sit amidst my messy, amateurish work and think about the easy money I'd turned down. I was an idiot, a broke, lonely idiot, trying to build a glass room onto a tin can in the middle of nowhere. But then I would go inside and read another one of her letters, or just touch the star quilt, and the resolve would harden in me again. Don't run. The locals in Northwood watched my progress with a kind of reserved curiosity. When I went to the small general store for supplies, Martha would ask me questions. "How's that foundation curing?" Or, "You using galvanized screws? That wood will last longer." She never offered help directly, but her advice was invaluable. An old farmer named Gus saw me struggling to lift a heavy beam one afternoon. He pulled his truck over, got out without a word, helped me hoist it into place, gave a single gruff nod, and drove away. It was their way. They weren't going to fight my battle for me, but they would hand me a tool if I dropped one. They were watching to see if I was worthy of the land I was on, worthy of being Eleanor Vance's grandson. 2 weeks into the project, the first letter from Ridgeback arrived. It was delivered by a courier to the general store, since I didn't have a real mailbox. Martha handed it to me with a grim look. It was a new offer, $300,000. The tone was friendly, almost cajoling. They understood my sentimental attachment, but urged me to be practical. I wrote a single sentence on the back of the letter. The answer is still no. I sent it back via the post office. The sunroom began to take shape. I learned how to frame a wall, how to make sure things were plumb and square. I learned the rhythm of the work, the satisfaction of driving a nail home with 3 clean strikes. The structure grew, a wooden skeleton against the hut's metal skin. It was my own creation, but it felt like a collaboration across time. I was completing the sentence she had started. I was building a future onto the fortress of the past. One day, while digging near the foundation, my shovel hit something hard. It was a small metal box. Inside, I found dozens of packets of seeds, carefully labeled in my grandmother's hand. Tomatoes, peppers, basil, marigolds. Seeds for a garden she had planned to plant. A month later, a different kind of letter arrived. This one was from a law firm representing Ridgeback. The friendly tone was gone. It was a formal, intimidating document, citing local zoning ordinances and building codes. It claimed my unpermitted structure was in violation and that they would be reporting it to the county, an action that could result in fines and a demolition order. It was a threat, plain and simple. They were trying to bully me, to use the system against me the same way my grandmother had used it for me. I read the letter, my stomach churning with fear. They had power, lawyers, money. I had $7,000 and a half-finished sunroom. That night, I almost gave up. The fear was a cold, physical presence in the hut. I lay awake, staring at the curved ceiling, imagining bulldozers rolling across the field. But then I thought about her. She had faced them down when they had threatened her life and the life of her grandchild. All they were threatening me with were fines and paperwork. I got up, lit a fire in the stove, and pulled out the legal folder she had left me. I started reading her notes, cross-referencing them with the old newspaper clippings. The loan shark my father had been involved with, a man named Marcus Thorne, had been arrested in a big federal raid years ago. But the articles mentioned he had a son, Julian Thorne, who had avoided indictment and had gone into real estate. A quick search on my phone's weak signal confirmed it. Julian Thorne was the CEO of Ridgeback Development. This wasn't just business, it was a vendetta. They didn't just want the land, they wanted to erase my grandmother's victory. The fear didn't vanish, but it transformed into a cold, hard anger. This was my land. This was my home. The next day I drove into the county seat. I went to the planning and zoning office. I showed the clerk my deed and the threatening letter from the lawyers. The clerk, a weary-looking man with thick glasses, looked over the documents. "Well," he said slowly, "they're not wrong. You do need a permit for an addition like that." My heart sank. "But," he continued, "this property is zoned as agricultural residential, and it's over 2 acres. Under County Ordinance 47B, accessory structures under 200 square feet don't require a building permit, just a notice of intent." My sunroom was exactly 10 feet by 18 feet, 180 square feet. My grandmother's notes had included a hand-drawn sketch of the addition with the dimensions clearly marked. She had known the rules. She had planned this, too. The clerk handed me a 1-page form. "Just fill this out, pay the $20 filing fee, and you're legal." I walked out of that office feeling 10 feet tall. It was a small victory, but it was mine. I had used their own system against them. When I got back, I didn't just work on the sunroom. I started building a proper fence around the property line, post by post. I put up a mailbox with my name on it, Vance. I was putting down roots, real and symbolic. The sunroom was finally finished in the early fall, just as the leaves on the surrounding hills began to turn fiery shades of red and gold. I had installed the polycarbonate panels on the roof and framed in large windows. The southern light poured in, warming the concrete floor. It was a beautiful, simple space. I built raised garden beds inside it from leftover lumber and filled them with soil from the field. I carefully planted the seeds my grandmother had saved. Life settled into a new rhythm. the rhythm of the seasons, of the sun rising and setting, of the slow, steady work of tending to a home. I spent my days working on the property, reinforcing the hut, clearing brush, and tending to the seedlings in the sunroom. I spent my evenings reading, not just my grandmother's letters, but books I bought from a used bookstore in the next town over. Books on gardening, on carpentry, on local history. I was educating myself, filling in the gaps the system had left in me. The letters from Ridgeback stopped. It was a tense, unnerving silence. I knew they hadn't given up. They were just regrouping, looking for a new angle of attack. But I wasn't scared anymore. I was prepared. This place had changed me. The quiet, the solitude, the physical labor. It had burned away the doubt and the fear, leaving something solid and resilient in its place. Winter came. The first snow fell, a thick, silent blanket that covered the field and clung to the metal roof of the hut. The world outside was white and still, but inside my sunroom, it was green. The tomato seedlings were a foot high. The basil filled the air with its sharp, sweet scent. I sat in the chair I'd built, a cup of hot coffee in my hands, and watched the snow fall through the big windows. The sunroom wasn't just an addition to the hut. It had become the heart of it. The hut was the fortress, the shield, the legacy of her defiance. The sunroom was the promise, the testament to life, the proof that something can grow even in the harshest of conditions. It was my contribution. It was what kept me alive, not just by giving me a purpose, but by connecting me to a past I had lost and a future I was building with my own two hands. It was a living memorial and a declaration of intent. I had not just inherited a piece of property. I had inherited a story, and now I was a part of it. They told me I was aging out of a system. They were wrong. I was aging into a legacy. The world will give you a label, the orphan, the ward of the state, the lost cause, and it will try to make you wear it. They'll offer you an easy way out that keeps you in a different kind of box. A comfortable one, maybe, but a box all the same. They will count on you to take the path of least resistance. My story is about finding the courage to reject the label and walk a harder path, a path that leads to a place that is truly your own. It's about realizing that home isn't something you're given. It's something you build, something you defend. It's in the posts you sink into the ground, the seeds you plant in the soil, the stories you refuse to let die. The battle for this land isn't over. I know Ridgeback will be back. The world is full of wolves. But now, I'm not a scared kid anymore. I'm a man standing on his own ground, surrounded by the love of a woman I never met, in a home we built together across time. The sunroom, full of light and life against the cold steel of the past, is my proof. It's proof that you can build a future of hope right onto a history of pain. What you inherit isn't just land or money. It's the choice to honor the sacrifices that came before you. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your own piece of the world or build a life from the ground up, please subscribe to the channel. These are the stories I want to tell, stories for everyone who has ever been underestimated. And I want to hear your story. In the comments, tell me about a time you chose the harder path, or about what home means to you. This isn't just a channel, it's a community of people who understand that the most beautiful things are the ones we have to fight for. Thank you for listening. I'll be here, reading your words, in my home, in the quiet light of the sunroom.